A woman stops her truck in the Colorado wilderness when a pale mountain lion cub blocks her path, not running, but crying. Against every rule, she follows it through freezing water, predators, and exhaustion, until a hidden trap reveals the real danger. She steps in anyway, not knowing what's waiting next. Before we begin, take a second and ask yourself this: what would you do if an animal looked at you, not with fear, but with trust, and silently asked for help? Because today's story isn't just about an animal rescue. It's about a moment when one choice changed two lives forever. If you're new here, welcome to Tales of Trust, where we dive deep into real-feeling rescue journeys, impossible decisions, and the thin line between walking away and stepping forward. If stories of courage, compassion, and unexpected twists move you, make sure you subscribe, like, and stay with us till the end, because this one escalates fast. What began as a routine day in the American wilderness turned into a race against time, through harsh terrain, hidden dangers, and a threat no one saw coming. A single cry broke the silence. Then came the pursuit. Then the risk. And finally, a decision that could not be undone. This rescue will test instinct, ethics, and bravery. And the twist at the end? It redefines who saves who. Stay with me, because once this journey begins, there's no turning back. Renee Calder hadn't planned on being a hero that morning. At 34, she was a field logistics coordinator for a U.S. wildlife conservation program, stationed temporarily near the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. Her job was simple on paper: check remote camera traps, log GPS data, and return to base before sundown. No rescues. No interference. Observe, document, leave. The morning air was thin and cold, pine-scented and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you believe nothing bad could happen. Renee's pickup crawled along an old dirt service road, tires crunching over gravel as the sun climbed higher. That's when she saw it. A flash of pale movement darted across the road. Renee slammed the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop just feet away from a small, unusually light-colored mountain lion cub. It didn't run. It didn't hiss. Instead, it stood frozen, then let out a sharp, broken cry that echoed off the trees. Renee stepped out slowly, heart pounding. "Hey, hey, easy," she whispered, hands raised. The cub walked toward her. Not aggressively. Not playfully. Desperately. When it reached her boots, it stumbled and pressed its tiny head against her leg. Renee's training screamed one word in her mind: this isn't normal. Renee knelt slowly, every instinct at war with her training. Mountain lion cubs did not approach humans. Ever. If a cub was alone, the mother was never far, usually watching, usually ready to attack. Renee scanned the tree line, her pulse loud in her ears. Nothing moved. No rustle. No warning growl. The cub cried again, a thin, rasping sound, then turned and padded a few steps toward the forest before stopping. It looked back at her. Waiting. Renee swallowed hard. There was an unspoken rule in wildlife conservation: do not interfere unless intervention is the only option left. Interfering could doom an animal as easily as saving it. But walking away from an animal actively seeking help? That carried its own consequences. She stood, keeping distance, and followed slowly as the cub led her off the road. Pine needles crunched under her boots. The cub moved with urgency at first, then slowed, its steps uneven. After 15 minutes, it faltered. The cub circled the same fallen log twice, sniffed the ground frantically, then sat and cried, soft, confused, lost. Renee's chest tightened. She crouched and examined the dirt. Faint tracks, large paw prints, cut through the soil, heading downhill toward a ravine. "Your mom," Renee whispered, more to herself than the cub. Something happened to her. The cub stood and pressed against her leg again. That was the moment Renee made her choice. She followed the tracks. The terrain changed fast. What began as gentle forest gave way to steep, broken ground. Renee moved carefully, following the tracks as they zigzagged down toward a narrow gorge carved by snowmelt. The cub stayed close now, brushing her boots, as if afraid she might disappear. 30 minutes in, Renee heard it before she saw it. Rushing water. The ravine opened into a fast-moving creek, swollen from recent mountain runoff. White water slammed against jagged rocks, loud enough to drown out thought. On the far side, the paw prints continued. Renee cursed under her breath. Crossing alone would be risky. Crossing with a cub, unthinkable. She scanned upstream and downstream. No shallow crossing. No fallen tree. The water was cold enough to steal strength in seconds. The cub stepped to the edge and cried, pacing back and forth, then looked up at her with wide, pale eyes. Renee dropped her pack and thought fast. She pulled out a length of paracord, a reflective vest, and a metal water bottle. She tied the bottle into the vest, creating weight, then hurled it downstream as far as she could. The splash echoed. A moment later, movement. Dark shapes slipped toward the disturbance, distracted. "Now," Renee whispered. She lifted the cub against her chest and stepped into the creek. The current slammed her legs immediately. Every step was a fight. Halfway across, her foot slipped. For one terrifying second, she almost went under. Then her boot found rock. And somehow, they made it. They didn't stop moving. Renee's clothes were soaked, her muscles burning from the cold, but she forced herself forward. The cub trembled against her chest, its breathing shallow and fast. Every few minutes it let out a weak sound, no longer a cry, more like a plea. After another hour, its strength finally gave out. The cub stumbled, legs shaking, then collapsed onto the dirt with a soft thud. Its sides heaved. Its tongue lolled slightly from its mouth. Renee dropped to her knees. "No, no, hey, stay with me." She checked its gums, pale. Dehydration. Shuck. Too much distance for such a young animal. She opened her pack. Water, barely half a bottle left. Food. Nothing usable. The energy bars she carried weren't safe for wildlife, especially carnivores this young. Renee looked around desperately. That's when she saw them. Circling high above the trees. Vultures. Her stomach twisted. In the wild, vultures meant only one thing. Death, or something very close to it. She scooped the cub into her arms again, ignoring the protest in her muscles, and followed the birds downhill. 10 minutes later, the smell hit her first, rot, heavy and unmistakable. A mule deer carcass lay tangled near the brush. Renee hesitated only a second. She grabbed her emergency flare and fired it skyward. The vultures exploded into the air. The cub fed. And slowly, strength returned to its limbs. But Renee knew they were running out of time. The tracks led them out of the trees and onto an exposed ridge. Renee stopped short. Ahead, spread across the open slope, stood a herd of plains bison, massive, unmoving silhouettes against the sky. Steam rose from their nostrils. One lifted its head, nostrils flaring as it caught the scent carried by the wind. Predator. The cub pressed closer to Renee's leg. Bison weren't aggressive by nature, but they were unpredictable, territorial, and powerful enough to end a life in seconds. Renee backed slowly, scanning for a way around, but the ridge narrowed sharply on both sides. Too late. A dominant bull stamped the ground once. Then again. The sound vibrated through Renee's boots. Others followed, forming a loose wall of muscle and horn. "Easy, easy," Renee whispered, heart hammering. The bull snorted and stepped forward. That's when something unexpected happened. A young bison calf broke from the group and trotted ahead, planting itself directly between Renee and the herd. It didn't charge. It didn't retreat. It simply stood there, blocking the adults, refusing to move. The bull hesitated. Renee didn't waste the moment. She scooped up the cub and moved sideways, slipping behind a line of rocks bordering the ridge. She didn't stop until the ground dipped and the herd disappeared from view. When she finally paused, her hands were shaking. One young life had delayed an entire herd. Renee looked down at the cub. "Guess we're not the only ones who know what it means to protect," she whispered. And then she saw it. The tracks ended, at a steep, unnatural drop. Renee approached the edge slowly, dread settling into her chest. The ground ahead didn't slope, it vanished. A deep, rectangular pit had been carved into the earth, its edges disguised with branches and dirt. At the bottom lay a pale shape, barely moving. The cub broke from Renee's side and rushed forward, stopping just short of the edge. It cried out, loud, raw, unmistakable. Renee dropped to her knees and peered down. A female mountain lion, unusually light in color, lay twisted at the bottom. Her sides barely rose. Her tongue was dry, eyes sunken. A poacher's trap. Renee's hands clenched into fists. She grabbed her radio. "Base, this is Calder. I have an adult cougar trapped in an illegal pit. Severe dehydration. Cub present. I need extraction and veterinary support, now." Static. Then a voice. "Copy that. Coordinates received. ETA 45 minutes. 45 minutes might as well have been a lifetime." Renee anchored a rope to a nearby tree, checked the knot twice, and began her descent. Dirt crumbled under her boots as she lowered herself into the pit. The mother growled weakly when Renee approached. "I know," Renee murmured, holding out water slowly. "I know. I'm helping." The lioness lapped greedily, strength flickering back into her eyes. Then Renee noticed movement in the corner. A rattlesnake, coiled, head raised. One strike would be fatal. Renee reached for the hatchet on her belt and held her breath. The rattlesnake struck first. Renee moved on instinct. The hatchet came down hard, pinning the snake's body to the dirt just behind its head. The rattle buzzed wildly for 2 seconds, then stopped. Renee exhaled shakily and turned back to the lioness, pouring the last of her water slowly, carefully. The animal's breathing steadied, but her body remained frighteningly weak. Above them, a sound cut through the air. Laughter. High-pitched. Harsh. Renee's head snapped up. Coyotes. At least 5 of them stood silhouetted at the pit's edge, eyes locked on the cub. The cub stood rigid, fur raised, letting out a fragile growl that held more courage than power. "No, no, no," Renee whispered. She scrambled up the rope, muscles screaming. By the time she reached the top, the coyotes were already spreading out, circling. Renee fired her last flare. The red burst sent 2 of them skidding back, but the others held their ground. They'd learned. Light didn't mean danger. One coyote stepped forward, teeth bared. Renee grabbed her folding shovel, planting herself between the cub and the pack. Her heart pounded. She had 1 shot. Then the cub did something no one could have expected. It charged. Tiny body, bared teeth, straight at the lead coyote's face. The coyote yelped in surprise. But the retaliation came fast. The cub was thrown aside, hitting the dirt hard. Renee screamed and ran. As the coyotes closed in, a siren howled in the distance. The siren grew louder, fast. Headlights burst over the ridge, cutting through dust and shadow as 2 wildlife response trucks barreled toward the pit. Engines roared. Horns blared. The coyotes froze. For a heartbeat, they stood their ground, ears pinned back, eyes reflecting white in the beams. Then instinct won. One by one, they broke formation and vanished into the brush. Renee collapsed to her knees beside the cub. It was alive, shaking, breathing, eyes fluttering. She pulled it against her chest, whispering over and over, "You're okay. You're okay." Rescue crews moved with practiced urgency. One team stabilized the cub. Another rappelled into the pit, securing the mother and administering fluids. 4 lines were placed. Sedation followed. A veterinarian looked up at Renee. "You did everything right. Another hour, maybe less, and we'd be too late." Renee sat back, the adrenaline finally draining from her body. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. As the lioness was lifted out, the cub stirred and let out a weak cry. Even sedated, the mother responded, head lifting slightly, breath catching as if she knew. They were loaded together. As the trucks pulled away, Renee watched the forest swallow the road again. She thought it was over. She was wrong. Because this rescue was about to come full circle. 2 months passed. Renee visited the rehabilitation center every weekend, even when her assignment ended. The cub, now stronger, heavier, eyes sharp with instinct, still recognized her. Every time Renee appeared, it paced the enclosure, tail flicking, issuing that same broken sound she'd first heard on the road. The mother recovered more slowly. Severe dehydration had masked something far worse. During routine imaging, the veterinarians discovered an old fracture along the lioness's spine, healed wrong. Long before the poacher's pit, she'd already been losing mobility. In the wild, it would have meant one thing. She would never hunt properly again. The decision was heavy. The cub could return to the wild. The mother could not. On release day, Renee stood at the edge of the open Colorado grasslands as the transport gate lifted. The young mountain lion stepped out cautiously, paused, then turned back. It didn't look at the forest. It looked at Renee. The veterinarian spoke softly. "We think the cub bonded to you. More than we expected." That was the twist. The cub hadn't just asked for help that day. It had chosen. And now Renee faced a decision she never imagined, one that would change her life just as permanently as it would change the cub's. Renee didn't make her decision quickly. She spent weeks consulting specialists, conservation boards, and ethics panels. The goal was never ownership, it was survival with dignity. In the end, the choice became clear. The cub was placed into a protected, non-public sanctuary in the Rockies, one designed for animals that couldn't safely return to the wild but still deserved space, instinct, and freedom without cages. Renee didn't become its owner. She became its constant. Years later, the cub, now a powerful, pale-coated mountain lion, still responds to one sound in the world: Renee's voice. Not because it was tamed, but because it remembered who didn't turn away. The mother lived out her days under expert care, pain-free, her cub never far, separated by necessity, connected by instinct. And that brings us to you. If this story moved you, remember this: compassion doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like staying when walking away would be easier. If you believe animals deserve protection, not exploitation, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it so these stories reach people who need to hear them. Because somewhere right now, an animal is waiting for someone to notice. And that someone might be you.